Chioma, a 35-year-old woman who recently married Emeka, a widower with a teenage daughter, Amaka, stood in the small sunlit kitchen of their modest Ibadan apartment. The smell of fried plantain and egg stew hung in the air. She moved quietly, careful not to make too much noise. Every sound seemed to echo too loudly in the house these days. "Amaka, your breakfast is ready," she called gently. No response. Moments later, Amaka emerged from her room in her neatly pressed school uniform, earbuds in, her expression unreadable. She sat at the table without looking at Chioma, pulled out her phone, and started scrolling. Chioma set the plate in front of her. "I made your favorite, ripe plantain, just like your mum used to." Amaka didn't look up. "Don't say that." Chioma hesitated. "I was only—" "You're not her," Amaka snapped, eyes finally meeting hers. "And you'll never be." The words struck harder than a slap. Chioma stood frozen for a moment, holding the serving spoon with both hands. Her throat tightened. She turned back to the kitchen counter, blinking fast. Emeka's voice came from the hallway, shirt half-buttoned, bag in hand. "You girls all right?" Chioma gave a tight smile. "Yes, just breakfast." Amaka went back to her phone. Emeka kissed the top of her head, barely glancing at Chioma. "You're leaving already?" Chioma asked, trying not to sound disappointed. He sighed. "You know Abuja traffic. I'll call later." She nodded. As he left, Chioma turned back to the table. Amaka was already done eating, rinsing her plate. "I packed your lunch," Chioma offered. "I'll buy at school," Amaka muttered, grabbing her bag and walking out the door. The silence that followed was too loud. Chioma stood alone in the kitchen, eyes on the half-eaten breakfast. She pressed her hand to her chest, then slowly sat down, staring at the chair Amaka had just left. She had entered this marriage with hope, a second chance at love and family. But this house didn't feel like home. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Orphaned young and raised by her grandmother in a quiet village outside Enugu, Chioma grew up learning to be strong. Life had never pampered her. By 12, she could cook for 5 and knew how to soothe a fever with herbs. Her grandmother, Mama Isioma, was her whole world. Stern but loving, never missing church, never raising her voice unless necessary. Chioma admired her, emulated her. But Mama died when Chioma was 21, and after that, life got harder. She moved to Lagos to work as a secretary, and soon fell in love with a man who seemed charming. That first relationship almost broke her. He was controlling, manipulative, violent when angry. She left after 2 years with nothing but a scar on her collarbone and a resolve never to lose herself again. She spent the next decade rebuilding, working, saving, avoiding anything that looked like romance. So when she met Emeka, calm, soft-spoken, steady, it felt like grace. He was a widower, 10 years into single parenthood, his wife gone from breast cancer. They met at a cousin's wedding in Ibadan. He wasn't flashy, didn't flatter with empty words, but he listened. And more than anything, he made her feel safe. When he proposed after a year, she said yes. Not just because she loved him, but because she believed in second chances. But 3 months into the marriage, that belief was beginning to crack. Emeka, though kind, was emotionally distant. He didn't talk much about his late wife, Ifeoma, but her memory filled the house in subtle ways. Her framed photo still above the TV, her favorite wrapper folded neatly in the wardrobe. Chioma didn't ask Emeka to remove them. She understood grief had its own stubborn clock. But when she gently suggested moving the photo to the bedroom, Emeka shook his head. "Let her remain in the heart of the home," he said. That was the first time Chioma realized she might be living in a shrine, not a home. Amaka, their 14-year-old daughter, was brilliant in school, sharp, observant, and guarded. She rarely smiled. Her bedroom door remained shut unless she was leaving for school or returning. She'd never called Chioma anything other than Chioma, not auntie, not mummy, just her name, flat and dismissive. When Chioma tried to braid her hair, Amaka pulled away. When Chioma made her favorite meal, spaghetti with fried peppered beef, Amaka barely touched it. One day, Chioma overheard her on the phone with a cousin. "She's not my mum. She's just my father's wife. That's all." The words stayed with her, like a stone at the base of her heart. She tried harder, offered to help with homework, left little encouraging notes in Amaka's lunchbox, even bought a book Amaka had mentioned wanting. Every gesture was met with a wall of cold politeness or worse, silence. Chioma smiled through it, but at night, she sometimes sat on the edge of the bathtub, crying into her towel, so Emeka wouldn't hear. Emeka, for his part, avoided confrontation. When Kioma told him how Amaka refused to speak to her, how it felt like walking on eggshells in her own house, he rubbed his eyes and muttered, "She's still grieving, just give her time." Then he'd turn over in bed and fall asleep. At a women's fellowship at church, Kioma raised the issue carefully. "How do you love a child who won't let you in?" she asked. The women nodded sympathetically, but their responses weren't comforting. "She's just grieving. Be patient. These teenagers, Ain, they'll grow out of it. You knew he had a child now. It won't be easy." It wasn't judgmental, but it wasn't support either. Kioma walked home that evening feeling more alone than before. One rainy Tuesday, after Amaka slammed the door in her face over a forgotten permission slip, Kioma stood at the sink, washing dishes. The rain pattered on the roof, soft and steady. She didn't realize she was crying until she saw her tears mixing with the soapy water. Her chest heaved silently. She gripped the edge of the sink, willing herself to breathe, to stay calm, to not let this child destroy the peace she had finally begun to taste. This was supposed to be her second chance at family. Instead, she felt like a guest overstaying her welcome. And yet, every morning, she woke up and tried again, cooked again, smiled again, because somewhere inside her, she still believed love could grow, even in hard soil. Amaka falls seriously ill after school one day. High fever, vomiting, weakness. Kioma was in the kitchen chopping okra when she heard the front door creak open. She expected a usual cold greeting, maybe a muttered, "I'm back." Instead, she heard something crash. Then silence. She rushed out and found Amaka collapsed in the corridor, her school uniform soaked with sweat, eyes half shut, lips pale. Panic gripped her chest. "Amaka!" she cried, dropping to her knees beside her. "Amaka, can you hear me?" The girl groaned weakly, her body burning hot to the touch. Kioma's heart jumped into her throat. She grabbed her phone and called Emeka. Once, twice, 3 times, no answer. His line was switched off. He had travelled to Abuja the day before for a government contract meeting. Said he'd only be gone 2 days. Kioma didn't wait. She wrapped Amaka in a bedsheet, flagged down a kike outside the gate, and rushed her to Mercy Care Hospital. By the time they arrived, Amaka had begun vomiting. A nurse quickly wheeled her into emergency as Kioma followed close behind, clutching her handbag. At the counter, the receptionist asked for a deposit before treatment. Without hesitation, Kioma pulled out her ATM card, 85,000 naira from her tailoring business saving, and paid. Inside the examination room, doctors examined Amaka carefully. A senior physician pulled Kioma aside. "She's severely dehydrated and her fever is dangerously high. There are signs of abdominal swelling. We need to run tests immediately, malaria, typhoid, but we also suspect possible kidney dysfunction. Has she been sick recently?" Kioma blinked, trying to steady herself. She never said anything. "She's been quiet, but she's always quiet." The doctor nodded grimly. "We'll do our best." That night, Kioma stayed by Amaka's side in the narrow hospital bed, wiping her face with a cold cloth, spooning ice chips into her mouth. Amaka drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes moaning, sometimes too weak to move. She never spoke, but once, as Kioma knelt by the bed praying, murmuring Psalm 121 over and over, Amaka opened her eyes just slightly. She saw Kioma's lips moving, tears shining in her tired eyes. The next morning, a firm knock came at the hospital door. It was Ngozi, Amaka's maternal aunt, a sharp-tongued woman known for speaking her mind. She swept into the room with a face full of concern and a heart full of judgment. "What happened? Where is her father?" she asked, not waiting for answers as she moved to Amaka's bedside. Kioma stood, her face calm but guarded. "He's still in Abuja. His line is not reachable." Ngozi's lips pursed. "Of course. Always absent." She turned and looked Kioma over. "You've tried, but let me take over from here. Blood is blood." Before Kioma could reply, a nurse walked in with a clipboard. "We'll need the guardian's signature for the consent form. Lab testing and ultrasound." Ngozi reached out to grab the pen, but the nurse paused. "Sorry, Ma. We already have a registered guardian on file, Mrs. Chioma Okafor." Ngozi stiffened. "I'm her mother's sister." The nurse offered a polite smile. "We understand, Ma. But for now, Kioma is the one on record." Ngozi's face fell. She threw Kioma a pointed glance, then muttered something about calling her lawyer before leaving in a huff. The room fell quiet again. Kioma returned to Amaka's side, brushing back her hair, adjusting her IV. Hours passed. She barely sat down. Later that night, Amaka whispered, "Horse." barely audible. Why did you stay? Chioma froze, then answered softly, because you're my daughter, whether you believe it or not. Amaka closed her eyes again, silent, but something had shifted. For the first time, Chioma wasn't just the woman married to her father. She was the woman who chose to stay when she didn't have to. As Amaka undergoes tests and the frightening possibility of dialysis looms, Chioma slips into the role of full-time caregiver without hesitation. The hospital becomes her new world. The harsh fluorescent lights, the antiseptic smell, the steady beep of machines measuring Amaka's fragile life. Days blur into nights as Chioma stays by her side, helping with feeding, bathing, and comforting her through the long, painful procedures. Amaka's hostility, once sharp and unyielding, begins to soften, though she still doesn't openly express it. Her harsh words become less frequent. Sometimes, she catches Chioma's hand for a brief moment and doesn't pull away. It's small, but for Chioma, it is a fragile thread of hope. But outside the hospital walls, life grows harsher. Chioma's small tailoring business, her pride and financial lifeline, begins to crumble. Her constant hospital visits mean missed orders and lost clients. One morning, a trusted client calls to say the contract is awarded elsewhere because Chioma can't deliver on time. She thanks them quietly and ends the call, swallowing the sting. The money in her purse shrinks rapidly. She stops buying new clothes and eats less to stretch her food budget. But Chioma hides the hardship from Amaka. She refuses to let the girl worry. This silent sacrifice weighs heavy on her, but it fuels her determination. Emeka finally returns from Abuja after a week, carrying gifts and tired eyes. But Amaka, distant and cold, refuses to look at him. She won't speak, won't answer his questions. The years of feeling abandoned have hardened her. Instead, she clings, awkwardly, uncomfortably, to Chioma. It unsettles them both. One late evening, as Chioma tucks Amaka into bed, the girl suddenly whispers, "Mama, my real mama warned me not to let another woman replace her." Chioma freezes. She sees the deep confusion and guilt in Amaka's eyes. The girl's late mother had left an unspoken legacy, a fierce protection of her place in Amaka's heart, which Amaka has carried like a silent burden all these years. That night, after Amaka falls asleep, Chioma locks herself in the bathroom and cries. The insults from Ngozi's last visit echo in her mind. You're not her mother. You'll never be her mother. Torn between love and rejection, between hope and despair, she feels the raw ache of being an outsider in her own home. A social worker assigned to Amaka's case visits, asking pointed questions about her primary caregiver. Amaka hesitates, cheeks flushed, but when the question is asked again, she murmurs, "Chioma." The word surprises them both. It's a quiet acknowledgement of the bond forming. Fragile, imperfect, but real. But peace remains elusive. Emeka's sister, Ifeoma, visits one afternoon, her tone sharp as she suggests sending Amaka to live with their grandmother in Enugu. She needs time away, Ifeoma insists. The stress here is too much. Grandma will care for her properly. Chioma's heart breaks at the thought of losing Amaka now, just as they begin to find each other in the chaos. The idea of separation feels like betrayal. She voices her pain in a fierce confrontation with Emeka. "You stand by while I fight alone," she accuses, voice trembling with years of frustration. "You leave me to carry the burden, and now you want to send her away." Emeka's face tightens. "I want what's best for Amaka." "Then listen," Chioma snaps. "She needs us here, both of us, not abandonment dressed as care." The argument swells with years of unspoken grievances. Emeka's emotional distance, Amaka's silence, Chioma's loneliness. Everything crashes in this moment. For the first time, Chioma confronts the painful truth. Her marriage is not the safe haven she hoped for, and the family she's trying to build feels more fragile than ever. The day the test results came back, the air in the hospital room turned heavy, thick with tension. Chioma sat beside Amaka, holding her hand tightly, bracing herself for the news. The doctor's voice was calm but grave. "Amaka's kidneys are failing. She will need a transplant soon if we are to save her." Chioma's heart sank. "And the good news?" Emeka asked, standing behind Chioma, hope flickering in his tired eyes. The doctor shook his head. "Unfortunately, we tested the closest relatives. The father, mother, maternal aunt, and none are compatible donors. It's rare, but it happens." Chioma's breath caught. A silence fell like a heavy curtain. Later that night, after Emeka and Amaka had gone to rest, Chioma sat alone in the small guest room. She pulled out her phone, researched kidney donation quietly, and after much hesitation, called the hospital to request to be tested. When the results came, Kioma discovered she was a partial match, not perfect, but enough to give Amaka a fighting chance. She didn't tell anyone. Days passed. Kioma quietly arranged meetings with doctors and consultants. She researched what the donation would mean physically, financially, emotionally. Her mind raced with fear and hope, but her decision was clear. She would do this, not to prove herself, not for acceptance, but because she loved Amaka like her own blood. One afternoon, Emeka arrived home early and caught her scrolling through transplant info on her tablet. His face darkened. "Kioma, what are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm getting tested to donate a kidney to Amaka," she said quietly. He stared at her in disbelief. "That's reckless. You can't just decide this alone. This isn't about you trying to prove something." Kioma's eyes burned. "She doesn't have to call me Mom. I'm not doing this for that." Emeka's voice rose, frustration pouring out. "You think that's enough. You can't just sacrifice yourself because she refuses to accept you." Amaka, who had been standing outside the door, suddenly stepped in, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Why would you do this for me?" she asked, voice breaking. Kioma rose and embraced her gently. "Because you are mine. You don't have to accept it now, but it's true." Amaka sobbed, the weight of years crashing down. "I was so cruel to you. I never wanted to hurt you." Kioma shook her head softly. "You were in pain. I understood." For the first time since her mother's death, Amaka's walls began to crumble. In the days that followed, the girl began calling her Auntie Kioma, a name spoken with a new softness and respect, signaling the slow birth of trust and love. Emeka watched the transformation quietly. One evening, he pulled Kioma aside and, voice thick with regret, apologized. "I'm sorry for standing silent, for not defending you when you needed me most." Kioma nodded, her own tears finally falling. That moment, raw and unguarded, marked not just a medical battle, but the healing of a broken family. The transplant became a symbol, painful, risky, but ultimately life-giving, just like the fragile bond they were learning to nurture together. Kioma's kidney donation surgery was a success. The days following were tense, filled with cautious hope and quiet prayers. Slowly but surely, Amaka's strength began to return. The high fevers that once racked her body gave way to steady improvement, and with each passing day, the fragile bond between them grew a little stronger. One afternoon, as the sunlight filtered softly through the hospital curtains, Amaka shyly asked Kioma to braid her hair, a small but monumental gesture. Since her mother's passing, Amaka had refused anyone else near her hair, holding tightly to the last physical connection to her mum. Kioma's hands trembled slightly, but she carefully worked through the tangles, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding. This act, simple yet intimate, marked the beginning of a new closeness. At home, Emeka's presence became steadier. He started attending medical appointments and sat beside Amaka during her therapy sessions. One evening, as Kioma prepared dinner, Emeka pulled her aside. His voice was soft but firm. "You are the glue that saved this family, Kioma. I've been blind to it for too long." Kioma felt a swell of relief and quiet pride. For the first time, her efforts were seen, not as a replacement or an intrusion, but as love in its purest form. When Amaka's maternal aunt came to visit, she was visibly surprised to find Amaka holding Kioma's hand, a small but powerful symbol of acceptance. The aunt said nothing, but her softened expression spoke volumes. Encouraged by the healing in their home, Kioma decided to reopen her catering business. This time, Emeka was her strongest supporter, handling logistics, helping with finances, even attending events. Together, they began building a future not just as husband and wife, but as a true family. At school, Amaka began speaking openly about Kioma. "She's not my mum by blood," she told her friends, "but she saved my life. She's my mother in every way that matters." There was no grand celebration, no dramatic speeches or parties. Instead, a quiet peace settled over their home. The once fractured family was slowly becoming whole, held together by sacrifice, forgiveness, and love that went beyond bloodlines. In this newfound calm, Kioma found strength, knowing she had not only saved Amaka's life, but had also carved a place for herself in a family that once rejected her. Amaka hands Kioma a handwritten letter for her birthday. Kioma carefully unfolds the paper and reads, "I didn't think I could ever love someone the way I loved my mum, but somehow You made space in my heart without forcing your way in. Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me. Tears fill Kioma's eyes. Amaka hugs her tightly and, for the first time, says, "Happy birthday, Mom." Later, they sit side by side in the kitchen, shelling agusi together. They laugh quietly, sharing a gentle closeness that was once impossible. No longer strangers, they are family. If you loved Kioma and Amaka's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful family dramas. Hit the bell so you never miss a story that touches the heart. Watch the videos on your screen now to continue exploring stories of love, sacrifice, and healing.